Hello from Hamburg, the birthplace of one of the greatest and to me dearest composers, who happens to be celebrating his birthday these days. You can probably already tell from the monument behind me, of course, I am talking about Johannes Brahms. I'm currently diving back into the wonderful E minor sonata, and one thought keeps coming to me. But before I come to that, and since nobody wants to watch me for 10 minutes, and since I'm already in Hamburg, I'll just show you a bit of the Brahms house in the video while I'm rambling.
Ever since we've had recordings to rely on, with interpretations from the greatest musicians across generations, we've reached a point where it almost feels necessary for us performers to rethink, reinterpret and play differently. Partly, of course, to set ourselves apart from the many great versions that already exist. But playing differently just for the sake of being different often leads us down to some pretty immature paths, ending up with versions the composer himself probably wouldn't have approved of. Which brings me to today's topic, Urtext. If you've seen my videos on the Bach suites, you'll know I'm a big fan of working with Urtext editions. But honestly, when it came to romantic music, I didn't always feel they were quite as crucial. Romantic music, and especially Brahms, doesn't seem at first like a field where we'd be longing for Urtext editions. Unlike Baroque music, whose performance traditions broke off in the 19th century and had to be painstakingly reconstructed later, Romantic repertoire never really disappeared from practice. We have recordings, traditions of teaching, direct transmissions, an unbroken line of musical practice.
And that's of course incredibly valuable, a major advantage. In most works, and in the E minor sonata more than any other I think, there's a kind of standard interpretation that we all more or less carry in our ears. What at first glance seems like a beautiful tradition is, upon closer inspection, often just a solidified history of reception, specific sound ideals, stylistic clichés, ingrained phrasing habits, and conventions we barely question anymore.
Brahms E minor sonata is a piece beloved across generations, continuously and without interruption performed. That's given us an incredibly rich and seamless reception history. Fascinating, don't get me wrong. But if we want to play differently, we shouldn't just be grasping at random ideas out of thin air. The reception history shows us the tools musicians of the past used to understand and convey the heart of the music to their audiences. But working with the Urtext forces us to find our own tools, because it gives us nothing but the composer's direct intentions to work with. And that's where the real opportunity lies. By starting from the Urtext, the chance of arriving at a truly personal, fresh interpretation is almost guaranteed. It automatically solves our problem for us. We create a version that hasn't been heard before, not by forcing originality, but by truly understanding the music and standing behind our interpretation with pride and conviction. Of course, the desire to express ourselves as musicians is completely legitimate. But at the heart of our task is still, first and foremost, to understand the composer's idea, left to us through the limited means of notation, and to realize it as best as we can through our instruments. that hasn't changed, even if today it sometimes feels like we have to sound different just to be noticed in a highly competitive musical world. Urtext doesn't just mean more correct notes. It's an invitation to get as close as possible to the composer's intention, without later improvements, well-meaning editorial markings, or interventions that might even unintentionally steer us in a certain direction. The Bärenreiter Urtext edition of the E minor sonata not only offers a carefully checked score, but also an extensive critical report. It's a real treasure trove for anyone brave enough to approach Brahms directly, rather than simply reciting him.
And especially in a time when we are all searching for new personal interpretations, something beyond the familiar sound blueprints of famous recordings, the return to the Urtext can be a real breakthrough. A step back in order to move forward. Back to the roots, not out of a museum-like reverence, but from a real artistic need. To free ourselves from the weight of tradition by reconnecting with the original language of the composer. Romantic music has its traditions, but maybe that's exactly why it's time to start seeing it again with fresh eyes.